So, good afternoon. Welcome. Today, my guest is Dr. Frank Sparadeo, a neuropsychologist who's going to talk to us about his work treating people who have both traumatic brain injuries and chronic pain. Um, Dr. Sparadeo, could you just tell us where you practice and how you got involved treating people with TBIs who also had chronic pain?
Sure. I currently have a private practice in Warwick, Rhode Island, but I also consult to a number of pain clinics and also addiction centers. Those addiction centers often treat patients that are addicted to opioid analgesic medication. So I do a lot of work with chronic pain patients who also have addiction. Additionally, my training in the 35 years of experience I've had has been primarily in assessing and treating people with various traumatic brain injuries, from mild injury to severe injury. When I was hospital-based, I worked in the neurosurgery department, and then at one point I became the director of the concussion center at Rhode Island Hospital for about 5 years, and then I was also an assistant professor of psychiatry and human behavior at Brown University Medical School.
Let me just ask you, Frank, is it common for neuropsychologists like you to have experience with both brain injuries and also chronic pain, or is that something that's not that common for somebody who does what you do?
Yeah, it's really not that common. Usually, the psychologists that are involved in chronic pain work have special training in what's called health psychology, and obviously neuropsychologists have special training in neuropsychology. Luckily for me, when I was going through my training days, I decided to do both. And I have worked in that capacity ever since I've been licensed. I've always been part of some sort of a pain clinic. What got me interested in the combination of traumatic brain injury and chronic pain was times in which I've evaluated patients for traumatic brain injury, and then they've come into my chronic pain clinic at some later date, and I began to see the connection between the traumatic brain injury and the occurrence of chronic pain.
And what is that connection? Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you think about most traumatic brain injuries, a vast majority anyway, I think are, automobile accidents, that kind of injury. And as you know, when people get involved in automobile accidents, they tend to have spine injuries. What happens is there's such a focus on the brain aspects of the case that other aspects of the case, like pain, isn't really paid attention to that much as the patient's going through rehab.
Now, Frank, when you talk about there's attention paid in the case, are you talking about legal case or medical case, or do doctors and lawyers have problems with these issues?
Right. Yeah. No. Initially, the medical approach to the cases focus very much on the TBI side, and don't really pay much attention to the patient. Patient might be complaining of chronic headache or back pain, neck pain, that kind of thing. Don't really pay that much attention to that. There tends to be a liberal use of narcotic medication with traumatic brain injury cases, probably a little bit too liberal use of that. So we're seeing this combination of case that has TBI and a narcotic addiction because they're being treated, with short-acting pain medications that are addictive based upon their complaints of spine pain, pretty much.
Okay. Now, you're actually a psychologist, so you have a PhD and not an MD, right?
That's correct.
Okay. But I take it you frequently work with patients who are on medication for their pain?
Yes. In fact, I'm the coordinator of a program that focuses on patients that have traumatic brain injury and who are currently addicted to such drugs as, say, oxycodone, for example. These patients are coming in with high levels of narcotic medication, chronic pain, and my job is to assess them, create a pain profile, determine the prognosis. The patient is then seen by our physician. takes them off the medication, puts them on Suboxone so they don't go into withdrawal. And then they have to see me for 12 weeks in both a group and individual format to learn the techniques of managing pain.
So is this over-medication associated with their brain injury diagnosis? Is that what's going on, or?
Well, not intentionally. I think what happens is in some cases, physicians, prescribers feel pretty bad for the patient because they had struggling with this traumatic brain injury, and then they're also complaining of pain. So, let me make you comfortable. I'm going to give you a prescription that's going to help you with your pain. And it's the intention is a good one to make a patient comfortable. But unfortunately, after a year or two of taking those medications and then getting increases, now you got a problem of, an addiction problem, not intentional addiction, but an addiction problem nonetheless. So that's one aspect of it. And, the majority of patients I see in my own office are patients that are coming in who have had a traumatic brain injury. It's been determined that they also have cervical injury, so they have neck pain, they have pain that travels down their arm, and they're not coping well with that. Now, what I will do is I'll do both a pain assessment, and which I'll describe in just a second, but I'll do the pain assessment and the cognitive evaluation. Now, the cognitive evaluation, obviously any patient that has a history of TBI will need that. But what's important about these patients with the pain is that pain also causes cognitive decline. So now you've got this sort of interacting phenomenon where you have a patient that has some sort of baseline TBI cognitive deficit combining with a cognitive deficit that also occurs with chronic pain.
How does the chronic pain cause cognitive problems, or how does that affect things?
Well, it can cause cognitive problems for a couple of different reasons. One is certainly pain is highly distracting. So they'll have attentional difficulty because they're attending too much to their pain. Another factor, which has been recently published in numerous journals, is the fact that there is a phenomenon of cortical thinning in patients who have chronic pain for a long period of time. So these patients will have, let's say they have chronic pain 5-6 years, and they have a corresponding decline in the quality of their life. And through recent MRI, functional MRI research, they demonstrate cortical thinning. Cortical thinning is associated with cognitive deficits. So there is
for those of us who stopped at like high school sophomore biology, cortical thinning. What is that?
It's a loss of brain cells in a particular area of the brain. So, for example, one of the phenomena that occurs is that when you have chronic pain, you're getting a constant stimulation going up the spinal cord into the thalamus, then it spreads out and hits the parietal lobe over and over and over again. And so what is hypothesized is that there's some sort of cellular exhaustion that occurs from constant stimulation as a result of either the inflammation or whatever it is that's causing the pain.
Cognitive, did you say cellular exhaustion?
Yes.
Does that mean, was that mean like the brain cells burn out?
Yes, the brain cells are getting exhausted basically. They can't recover their energy. So, for example, if you look at a scan, something like a PET scan, for example, you'll see that the brain, one of the things the brain wants to do is it wants to save energy, right? So if you're going to engage in a frontal lobe task, it's going to shunt all of its glucose metabolism to the frontal lobes and reserve activity in the other parts of the brain. When you look at a patient with chronic pain, they don't do that. Their parietal lobe just continues to fire because it's getting all that excessive stimulation from the occurrence of chronic pain.
Is any of that reversible?
Yes, yes. If a patient can, there's a few things that you can do. One certainly is getting the patient to adjust and manage their pain better so that they feel more in control of it. One of the things that chronic pain patients tend to do is reduce their stimulation and get isolated. That's the worst thing you can do. That actually sort of enhances this cognitive difficulty that they have with a cell exhaustion. They need to have stimulation in other parts of the brain. They need to have a sense of control, better control than what they currently have.
Can I ask you a question there, Frank? Because if I recall, at least from some of my clients who have had brain injuries, particularly right after they first occurred, when they're just diagnosed with a concussion, usually they're told, a lot of times it seems like, or maybe all of the time, they're told, like, rest, minimize stimulation, minimize the demands on your brain.
Yeah.
And if I'm hearing what you're saying correctly, that actually can make things worse if you're trying to treat chronic pain. Is that right?
Well, I think you have to look at the timing of it. I think in the early phases of recovery from TBI, the stimulation that you are subjected to should be organized. It should be part of a rehab program. As you go out, as you're, a year after TBI, 2 years after TBI, and now other issues begin to become prominent, like to what degree are you socializing appropriately? Do your cognitive deficits keep you from working? Those kind of things. Now you have chronic pain as well. How is that affecting the way you compensate for your cognitive deficits from your TBI? And what we find is that when the pain becomes more and more prominent over time, is that they neglect the cognitive rehab training that they've had, and then they tend to isolate, which then makes them look worse. So it's a complex issue, but it's not infrequent. Probably 50% of patients that have histories of chronic brain injury will also have a co-occurring chronic pain issue.
When in medicine or psychology, when you talk about chronic pain, it's a phrase that gets tossed around a lot, but is there sort of an accepted definition as to what clinicians are talking about when they use the phrase chronic pain?
Well, there is an accepted definition by the International Association for the Study of Pain. It's an interesting definition because the definition of chronic pain is basically states that chronic pain is a psychological state, and that the brain is the filter from which we determine what the meaningfulness of the pain is to us in our lives. So one of the reasons you see psychologists in pain clinics is because chronic pain has a huge psychological component to it. I'm not saying that chronic pain is not real. It's real. It's just that we have a brain and we react to the pain, and oftentimes the reactions that we have to our pain are either incorrect, or they actually make the pain worse, or we develop emotional reactions that cause depression, which make it more difficult to adjust to our TBI. So the definition of chronic pain, first of all, has to start with the understanding that brain factors, psychological factors, play a major role. The other aspect of chronic pain you have to understand is what type of chronic pain is it? And there are numerous types of chronic pain. Complex regional pain syndrome, for example, is a very difficult pain disorder that difficult to treat and highly distracting. Then you have spine-based pain, low back pain, cervicalgia. Then you have, other forms of pain, arthritic pain, and so on. So you start off with the concept that a brain, there's a physiological component, but there's also a brain component to that pain experience. The second aspect of that is, what kind of pain is it? And how does this type of pain, how does a person that has this type of pain spend their life? How do they actually manage it? And what we find is that the most effective way of managing pain is not by getting an injection. It's not by taking a narcotic. It's by taking control of your life and utilizing various techniques to make yourself feel more in control of it. So I always tell my patients that they're the center of the treatment process. They're the ones who have to run the program, right? They have to be the center of our attention, and they have to be the center of their own attention It's their responsibility to learn mechanisms of pain management. This is where the TBI complication comes in. So if a patient has TBI and they have cognitive deficits that are consistent with TBI, now they have chronic pain. It makes it a little bit more difficult now to work with them around the concept of pain management.
What are some of the difficulties that you encounter?
Memory, for example. So the most effective form of behaviorally based pain management is a group therapy process. So they have to process what goes on in the group, and then later on they have to use that. So they have to have some sort of memory of what went on during that group process. Now, the other aspect of it is loss of focus. So the patient's in the group and they lose focus and they don't know what the group is talking about, and
So how do you address some of those problems when you're doing therapy with the people who have both TBIs and chronic pain issues?
I just had a case which is a great example of the kind of things you can do. We had a group of 8 patients that had chronic pain and mild TBI and medication addiction. By the time they get in the group, the medication addiction is pretty much taken care of. They're on Suboxone. They're not taking large amounts of analgesic medication. One of the patients in that group had a pretty difficult memory impairment. He had a lot of problems recalling information after the group. We asked his wife to come in and take notes for him. And all the other patients in the group were perfectly fine with that. And it worked great. I mean, it was really, really helpful, because what would happen is she'd go home and review it, and then review it each day until the next time we met. That kind of cueing process was helping him actually develop a better management program for himself and better manage his pain. This was an individual who had a lot of what we call pain behaviors. Pain behaviors are vocalizations, oohs and ahs, and lots of movement and magnification, looking at the pain, constantly thinking about the pain, which tends to magnify it. So what we did in this case, we were trying to get him to distract himself. Number one, don't reflect on pain all day long, reduce that. Get away from isolation, interact with your wife, interact with your kids, go out to dinner, be social. And then also start engaging in activities that you stopped doing. Start engaging in those activities at a minimal amount. So for example, if a person really enjoyed going fishing on a regular basis, for example, well, maybe they can't fish again because pulling the fish up hurts their back. Maybe what they could do is assist someone who's fishing. Or maybe they can, one example that actually was a real one was we had a patient who really enjoyed gardening, for example. But if he went outside to do gardening, it would really hurt his back. So we had him learn how to do indoor gardening. And that was a real nice substitute for that behavior. So we try to get them to do values-based activity development of what we're trying to do. So now you've got a person who comes in with no activities, who sits around all day in the dark, cries about their pain all day, has cognitive deficits, and takes too much medication. Now we've got this person on less medication. They're more active. They feel alive to their patients, to their family. Most of the time, the family don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to interact. So it's a complex process. It takes some time to get through it. But it's definitely an approach that has benefits for the patient. So we've been doing this program now for about 4 years, and we've seen some really great improvements in the patients that we see.
How big are the groups? You said that you usually do it optimally in a group setting. How many patients do you usually have in a group?
We run anywhere from 8 to 12 patients in a group. We'll go as high as 12, only because the room is not big enough for any more than that. So we have 8 to 12 patients in the group. Actually, that's probably, if you get any higher than that, it becomes a little bit difficult to manage. But the group runs for about an hour and a half, and it's a programmed approach. Each group meeting has a different theme. So we might work on the use of meditation, for example, as a pain control mechanism. Patients will tend to, on a 10-point scale, they may have a 8 out of 10 pain. If they do meditation, they'll have a 6. So it'll actually dampen some of that pain. So we teach them that. We teach them ways to distract themselves. We teach them better ways to understand how their pain, what the physiology and anatomy of their pain is. That a lot of times their belief system is way out of whack, so they don't really understand why they have pain or how it manifests itself. They have a lot of unusual ideas about that. So we want to give them the right information. That becomes very important. And then the other part of it is this concept of self-efficacy, where we want these patients to feel that they can become experts in taking care of themselves.
Let me ask you this, Frank. Something that I've noticed amongst clients of mine who've had traumatic brain injuries, particularly the ones that get characterized as mild traumatic brain injuries. And you and I have discussed, and you've taught me how misleading the term mild is.
Yeah.
I think the phrase you used is
subtle but severe.
Thank you. That was exactly the catchphrase that I was looking for that you had taught me. But one of the things that I've noticed, and I think it's probably common, but you're the expert, is that many times people who have a mild traumatic brain injury sort of self-isolate. It's not that they appear at all times like they're brain injured. In fact, part of the problem is they look pretty good. A lot of the time they sound pretty good, but they're very unreliable, and their cognitive functioning is highly variable. And there'll be times when they'll slip up and they get nervous or anxious, very understandably, that they're going to embarrass themselves. And so at least some of my clients have essentially self-isolated because it makes them very uncomfortable because they look fine and people expect them to be fine, but they have some serious things that they're trying to work around. I guess what I was going to ask you is, part of your treatment involves, first of all, getting them to participate in a group and feeling comfortable socially interacting with 10 or 11 other people. And then also, it sounds like part of the treatment is you try to get them to start engaging with the outside world more. And I was wondering if that aspect of the brain injury where people sometimes tend to self-isolate creates complications, and if it does, how you deal with those.
Yeah. One thing you have to try to do is get a good understanding of the basis of the self-isolation. Is the self-isolation a result of social anxiety, or is it a result of a loss of confidence? What is the patient's belief about why they are not interacting with the world? And then once you understand what the belief is, then you can start breaking down that belief. That belief is probably not correct. And so what we want to do is explain to the patient that even though this is your belief, it is a belief that's distorted. And what we want to do is clarify what's the proper belief here. And the proper belief almost always is that in order for me to live the best way in my life and to have the best quality of life, it has to involve other people. I have to have some sort of a normal social life. I have to be with people. We're human beings. Human beings are designed to be social, right? So when you don't put that variable in there, you don't get the proper cognitive stimulation. You don't get to hear other points of view. You don't get to meet people that you can learn things from. So you're really at a disadvantage if you persist in a belief that's distorted. And
How do you address the fears that I've had some of my clients express, that they're just going to embarrass themselves? They isolate because they're just afraid they're going to say something inappropriate or something that sounds dumb, that they're going to maybe have a strange emotional outburst, which is a symptom that some folks have. I mean, how do you deal with a patient who's just concerned that they're going to embarrass themselves?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, they first of all have to accept that they have this particular this particular type of difficulty, that perhaps they have problem controlling impulsivity, or perhaps they have difficulty with emotional regulation at times. Sometimes it's important for patients, if they are interacting with someone, to let the person know, hey, I had this brain injury. Sometimes I say things I don't mean, and then let people know. And I know that sounds a little difficult to do, but when patients learn how to do it, that allows them to get out more, because now they feel, okay, well, the person's accepting me for what I am, for who I am. And that concept of acceptance becomes very important. Most of the time when people feel that way, the way you described it, it's not rational. When they finally take a chance and go out and interact with people, they don't really experience any bad effects of maybe saying the wrong thing. They really don't. And so a lot of the avoidance is based upon, the incorrect belief that I'm defective and people will see it and it'll embarrass me. And it just happens that in the real world, it does not seem to be the case. And people are understanding, especially if you're willing to talk about it.
Now, a little while ago, you mentioned one of your patients who, to assist him, you had his wife sit in and take notes because
Yes.
I was wondering, do you regularly try to involve the family members, and is it important to have the family involved, even if whether or not they're coming to the sessions? Do the other family members play a role in helping their
Yeah.
someone recover?
Yeah, I mean, family members and even friends, for that matter, are important in this person's, system. Within their system, there's groups of people. Family is the closest group, and I always look at chronic pain as a family chronic pain, because everyone has to deal with it. So when a person has a chronic pain issue, and let's say it's the father and the son wants to approach the father about something he wants to talk about, but the father's oohing and eyeing. Then he says, well, I better not talk to him because he's in a lot of pain. And so there's a lot of communication difficulty that occurs because people don't know what to do or what to say. The same thing occurs in the TBI situation, where families have to understand what the strengths and weaknesses are of this individual. They have to know when it's time to cue, when it's time not to cue, and be an assistant to the family member that's been injured. So families are critical, and in the program that I was describing earlier, in which we have a combination of TBI and chronic pain, those patients, the first day they come in, I think the first or second day they come in, we request the family come in, all of them, because we want to know what their beliefs are too. One of the critical things that happens with chronic pain is over solicitousness. So the spouse or the kids help out too much. And so the patient who has the pain begins to learn that they don't have to do much because everyone does it for them. So that's not good either. So we
So
want.
if you're a spouse or a child or another family member, how can you figure out what you should be doing? Do you need to consult? Maybe you do need to just get your loved one to a competent clinician. But are there any general advice that you could give to a family member who's got someone who's dealing with a brain injury and chronic pain? Are there any rules of thumb?
Well, that question brings to mind a case that I'll never forget. This was an individual who had a history of multiple concussions, who then developed very serious neck pain, and basically stopped working, not because of the accumulation of concussions, but because of the pain, and then began to sit home. And when he came to our program, I asked him if he would bring his wife to the next appointment. And when he did, I spent almost the entire session asking her to tell me what he was like before the pain, and then what is he like now, and how much do you do for him? And as we began to describe all that, he began to realize that I'm asking her to do too much, and she's doing it, and then I was able to point out to him, you see how this evolves. Ultimately, you become completely dependent on everyone around you. You'll never become liberated from your pain if you stay dependent, right? So then, we have to ask the wife, okay, now you got to hold back now. You got to say no sometimes. And you're not going to feel good doing that, but you're going to have to do it because he needs to get some of his independence back.
And what happened?
That's exactly what happened. He over the course of about, I don't know, 3 to 6 months, he was with us. He increased activity level in the mornings. Instead of her going out and getting him a coffee or whatever, she was going out and getting him something every month. I can't remember what it was. He decided he would go, and he began to do more of these tasks. We figured out what kind of household tasks he could do without aggravating his pain. And there were certain household tasks that he said, I think I can do that. And he would do that. And I'll tell you, when I saw her again, she was quite relieved because, her work day was difficult. She'd go to work all day and then come home and work some more to kind of keep him happy. Now she realized that wasn't necessary. And in fact, it was debilitating to him.
Wow. So when you have patients who come in for treatment for TBI and chronic pain issues, is there a certain number of sessions or length of treatment that's typical, or does it just vary depending on the patient? Or
well, it depends. If I'm seeing the person individually, then it really varies. But if programmatically, I have a program that I'm actually running. That's a 12-week program. That doesn't mean they can't stay. If they want to stay after 12 weeks, they can do that. But we've sort of focused it on 12 weeks. But the program really requires a good assessment. So we do the neuropsych assessment as well as a pain assessment. And, as I mentioned earlier, and as you inquired, I'm not a physician, I'm a psychologist. How do I do a pain assessment? It's not about the physical pain. It's not about how the person's body is working at that moment. It's about how does this pain manifest itself? How does it impact the patient? And so we do a very, very deep analysis of how this pain is having an impact on this individual. When we use standard measures like the sickness impact profile, we use, I love to look at patients' belief systems. So I have what's called a survey of pain attitudes. We take a look at maladaptive beliefs versus adaptive beliefs. We look at illness-focused coping versus wellness-focused coping. Those are very important variables because if a person has a high degree of illness-focused coping, they will tend to take a much longer time to figure out how to adjust to their pain. So we're trying to, in the course of the treatment process, we're giving them techniques, but we're also trying to get underneath all of it and help them have a more realistic view of the pain, its role, and what their role is in managing it. We give them all a book called Managing Your Pain Before It Manages You. And that's the whole point, is that we got to get you back in charge.
Who wrote the book?
Oh, geez. It's a classic
maybe
book.
Somebody watching might want to order a copy.
Off the top of my head, I know the author, but I can't think of it at the moment. But that's a book that's been around for many, many years, and it's been rewritten, and it's amazing. It's a great book. Okay. It's called How to Manage Your Pain Before It Manages You. And if you look that up on Amazon, you'll find it. It'll be right there. It's a paperback manual, and our program basically follows the manual.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Frank, we try to keep these down to reasonable lengths in terms of our things. Is there anything before we sign off that you'd like people who are suffering, or their families who are suffering with both brain injuries and chronic pain, or anything that you think is really important that you'd like to add or share while we still have a couple minutes left?
I think that if you're a person who has survived a brain injury, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe, and in addition to that, you've also developed chronic pain, there is hope for you. There is treatment. There is an ability to make your life a little bit better. And I think that the way that that's going to happen is you have to get into a frame of mind in which you understand that we're going to have to give you tools that you use. People, you are not going to be able to go to some clinician someplace who waves a magic wand and all of it gets better. Much of what results in improvement is something that you do yourself. And my job is to suggest the tools, help you practice using the tools, and then sending you on your way when you learn how to manage this yourself.
Let me ask you one final question, Frank, which occurs to me. I think earlier you told us that, I think you said 50% or so of people with TBIs also have chronic pain. Was that the?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And I think you mentioned that clinicians, doctors and psychologists frequently focus on the TBI and don't really pay any attention to the chronic pain issues.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
If you're suffering from chronic pain and a TBI, or you have a family member who is, and you think you're being ignored, is there a good way to sort of try to key in your treating doctor to, hey, I'm in pain here. What's going on? Or, is there anything you could suggest to somebody who's in that situation?
Yeah, I think I found that even patients ignore it. They don't want to talk about it oftentimes. That they, and you're working hard. I had a patient a few years back who I was doing cognitive rehab with myself, and I was, as well as some psychotherapy. He was depressed. He had a brain injury. He was rear-ended. I noticed that the cognitive rehabilitation progress had stopped. We weren't getting anywhere. And our goal was to get him back to work. I mean, we weren't getting anywhere. And I said to him, something else is going on here. What's going on that's causing this stall in this progress? And he says, well, I don't know, but maybe because I'm in a lot of pain. I don't know. That's the first time I knew he was in pain. I had been seeing him for a few months. So I said, how come you didn't tell me that? He says, well, because my brain is more important, And I said, well, your brain is very important, but where do you feel the pain? You feel it in your brain. That's where it is. So what we have to do is figure out a way to go to integrate this pain issue with the cognitive rehab so that you can continue with your progress. So I got him involved in an aggressive pain management program, suspended the cognitive rehab for a little while, got him into the aggressive pain management program, restarted the cognitive rehab. He's working full time, and he's doing a great job. He real great case because his case when I initially saw him looked like oh my God, this is going to take a long time, and he doesn't have a good prognosis and so on. But the fact of the matter is that once we identified this other variable, that is, I have pain, that made all the difference in the world in getting this person to develop a process of managing the pain to such a degree that he could use the cognitive rehab techniques and then go to work. And that's exactly what happened.
Frank, that's fantastic. If somebody watching this wanted to get more information from you about your program or your treatment of people with chronic pain and TBIs, is there any contact information you could give them? An email or a phone number or some way they could reach you? Perhaps they either have or know somebody who's dealing with these issues who might benefit from your program. How would they get a hold of you?
I do have an email, which would be fsparadio@drsparadio.com.
Okay, and for people watching, Sparadeo is spelled Sparedeo, right, Frank?
Nope.
I miss it? Okay. It shouldn't be on the National Spelling Bee. All right.
I'll spell it for you.
Spell it, yeah.
Sparadeo.
Okay. If I had it in front of me, I'd know how to do it. Why don't you spell it again for everyone and then give them the email address again?
Okay, it's Sparadeo. And the email is F as in Frank, Sparadeo @drsparadio.com.
Thank you, Frank. So Someday, would you be willing to maybe come back and tell us a little more about some of the issues that people who suffer with TBIs and or chronic pain have? Because I think we've only scratched the surface, and I know from having talked and worked with you in the past that you know a lot about a lot of this stuff. So would you consider coming back again sometime and continuing the conversation?
Sure, I'd love to come back.
Oh, that would be fantastic. So for people who didn't catch the beginning, I'm John Caron from the KJC Law Firm, and my guest today has been Dr. Frank Sparadeo, a neuropsychologist from Warwick. I got that right, yes?
Right. Yep.
From Warwick, Rhode Island, who treats both persons with traumatic brain injuries and also persons with chronic pain, and spends a lot of time treating people with both of those issues. Frank, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been a pleasure learning from you. And since this is a Friday, have a great weekend and thank you.
Thank you. Same to you. Thanks.